this is the first time that we've organized a pre-conference event, and we're very pleased that the turnout is quite what it is. So we're happy to see so many people coming to an event which focuses on research. This event is being supported by the ReSIG within IATEFL. Those of you who aren't members of IATEFL, the International Association for the Teaching of English as a Foreign Language, I urge you to become members. There are many benefits if you become members of IATEFL. And besides that, once you become members of IATEFL, you can choose to become part of a special interest group. Obviously, since I myself sit on the committee of the ReSIG, I encourage you to become members of the ReSIG Special Interest Group. The ReSIG, as it's known, is sponsoring the filming of today's event, and it also very kindly awarded a scholarship, and the award winner is Asli from Turkey, whom I invite here to receive her scholarship. So today's workshop, full-day workshop, is quite special because it will be led by a world-renowned expert on teacher cognition. He is a man whom I've admired for many, many years, who has inspired me in my own work, my own research, and he's been involved in TESOL for more than 25 years, so he'll be sharing his experience in relation to that, but focusing in particular on how we can actually improve research in our own ELT community here in Malta. Until recently, he was a full professor at the University of Leeds. Now he's a visiting professor, but he's also working on a freelance basis, doing work for governmental organizations all over the world. Just yesterday evening, he was telling us that he's been to countries like Sudan, Oman, Pakistan, Malaysia, Turkey, providing consultancy to governments on teacher development, which is one of his areas of interest. Simon is one of those rare academics whose name becomes synonymous with the field. And if you're writing an article, a journal article about that particular field, the editor won't allow you to avoid mentioning his name. They'll send you the article back requesting you to actually refer to Simon's work. And that shows you how significant his research is. He is the author of an impressive list of publications, a very long list of publications, starting from the early 90s, going up to this year. And if you actually check his blog, you can see also the publications that he's currently working on and the publications that will be published next year. His most recent book is entitled Teacher Research in Language Teaching. It's published by Cambridge University Press. And besides his publications, he is a devoted writer. Besides his publications, Simon has, throughout his career, won many research awards and project funding to actually amount to thousands and thousands of pounds. This list of achievements can be found on his blog, which is suitably named The Joys of Being an Academic. And I mean, when you see someone like Simon, who's had such fulfilling academic career, it is truly a joy to be an academic. Thank you, Simon. Thank you.
I had nothing to do with that introduction, okay? Thank you very much, Daniel. It's true that journal editors will refuse to publish your articles, especially if I'm on the editorial board, I think you should say. It's not always the case. So thank you very much for that kind introduction. Thank you all for coming. It's my first time back in Malta for 16 years, so it's special for me to be here as well, and nice to catch up with some people I haven't seen for quite a while. So look forward to that during the day and over the next few days. So our focus is going to be on good quality ELT research today. I'm going to approach this in a broadly inclusive way because you all have your own particular reasons for being here. Some of you may be doing doctoral research at the moment or master's level research. Others may be more interested in research with a more practical orientation to support you in the classroom. I'm not going to focus on any particular one of those interests, just to make sure there's something in this for everyone, okay? So you have a handout in front of you which has a program on the front page, or a schedule. And as you see, we work from now till 4:30, which seems like a long way away, doesn't it? But we've got lunch from 1 to 2, because I know that's important to know we will have lunch. And there are also 2 shorter breaks. When I was originally given the program, or the proposed program, there weren't any shorter breaks. It was just, we start now and work till lunchtime, and then we eat. And I thought maybe that would be a bit too demanding on all of us. So we've got 2 15-minute breaks just to stretch our legs in the middle of sessions. And I believe there'll be some refreshments available then as well. Not long enough to go for a swim or whatever like that, but just enough to stretch legs or whatever other kind of break you need. The overall purpose, I guess, of the workshop today is just to think about what good quality means in relation to research and how we can achieve it. And it's quite a simple idea. At the end of the day, if research isn't good quality, it's a waste of time. I mean, the idea of bad quality research is a bit of it's an oxymoron. You know, what is bad quality research? If it's bad quality, we shouldn't even call it research. So without quality, the whole exercise of doing research becomes slightly pointless, and quality needs to be at the forefront of our minds from the outset. It's not something we think about at the end of a project. So hopefully by the end of the day, you've got some new ideas, or you've been reminded of ideas and strategies which you can use to improve the quality of the research you do. If you're not doing research yourself, I think the ideas we cover will also improve your ability to evaluate or critique the research you read or the research you hear others talk about. In that respect, it can be useful as well. The basic way we'll work is there are a number of tasks on the handout which we'll work through. I won't be standing here talking for any extended periods. I know the cameraman is keen to get some shots of me standing here talking, and I'll try to oblige every now and then. But most of the time, we'll be working through the tasks, and then we'll be discussing those together with short bits of input as required. I've got some slides which we'll use every now and then, but they're not really that important, okay? Okay, so we get cracking. Shall we get cracking? Are there any questions before we move on? Is everyone comfortable? Yeah. The room, I was sent a photo of the room before I came, and they said, this is the room you'll be using. And the picture I was sent had chairs organized in sort of, lecture mode, rows of seats. And I said, that's not really conducive to the kind of session we're going to be doing. I said, can we just put the chairs in small groups of 4 or 5? But the chairs in the picture had little desks on them. But being the suspicious person I am, I said, and can you confirm, please, that the chairs in the room are the same as the chairs in the picture? And I think Sue checked, and the reply was, no, that's quite an old picture. The chairs in the room don't have desks. So I'm very glad I checked that, because if you'd been sitting, I think, for a whole day on chairs without any tables, it can become a bit tiring. So the best we could do was these large tables. I would have preferred something a bit smaller, but I'm sure we can work in that way, okay? You might not want to be one whole group around the table when we're doing the tasks. You might want to work in sort of groups of 3 maybe, but I'll leave you to sort that out. If you start feeling cold because of the AC, or warm, please let us know. Okay, please let us know. If you need to leave the room at any point for whatever reason, you don't need to put up your hand and ask for permission. Okay, we'll assume there's a good reason for that. Okay. If we're moving too slowly and you want me to get on with it, please tell me. If we're moving too fast and we need to slow down, please tell me. Okay. It's not really a matter of how much we cover. It's a matter of what we cover well, I think. Okay. So there may be things on the handout which I decide to skim over in the interest of time, or because I sense you already know it. I'm sure there's quite a few things here you've heard before. Okay, so let's get going with task 1. It's at the top of page 2, which is sort of an introductory task for you to get to know one another if you need to, and also for you to think about why you're here and what you'd like to get out of the day. So there are 2 questions there. The first one is about why you're here, what you hope to get out of the day, and what I'm asking you to do in the first task is to write down one question. Write down one question you hope will be answered by the end of the day. I know you've got more than one question, but think about the one question, if you had to choose, which you're hoping will answer by the end of the day. And could you write that on a separate piece of paper? I think you've got pads there, so I can come and collect them. Because if I'm not aware of your questions, then I can't really respond to them. So please write one question on a separate sheet of paper, which I'll collect. And it's a question you hope will answer by the end of the day. And presumably it will be a question related to some aspect of research. When you've done that, the second part of the task is really just to introduce yourself, have a chat with someone next to you about who you are, what you do in relation to research while you're here. I mean, if you're sitting next to an old friend, you can find something else to talk about. And there are a number of questions there just to guide you if you need guidance for the introduction, okay? So 2 things. Write down the question, please, and then have a quick chat with the people next to you about your question and about other things. Okay, so thanks for the questions. I will read through those at some point while you're working, and then I can try and steer us in a direction that addresses, let's say, most of the questions. I can't promise all of them until I see them. Yeah, I'll do my best. I'll read them while you're working and make sure I try to emphasize things. So there were some questions here just to orient you to the whole area of research and in relation to your own work. One particular question I'm interested in is that D, to what extent is doing or knowing about doing research relevant to your current job? Would anyone like to just very briefly say a few words about that? How relevant is doing or knowing about doing research relevant to your current job? For example, is it something you're expected to do? Is it something you're encouraged to do, which is slightly different? Or is it something that you don't really have to do, but maybe you're interested in doing, or there may be other options? Would anyone like to? Yes, please.
I think it's important regardless of what job, but particularly in teaching, because research, whatever kind, obviously good quality research, is a source of knowledge at the end of the day. So it helps you gain an insight so that into the areas that you're interested in, and to keep updated, basically. Okay, so that's theoretically. I don't think we can disagree with that argument. I guess in practical terms, though, as for example, a teacher of English, are you required or expected or encouraged to do research, or is it just a matter of your own personal interest? I would imagine that it's a matter of your own personal interest more than anything else. However, I think that practically speaking, you as a teacher in the classroom, you can conduct your own research. Yeah. Okay, all right. Let's pass the.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. 2 years ago, I started Gediz University in Turkey. I was encouraged to do teacher research, and we presented our papers at a conference at our university. The last year, it was something I chose myself. There are various methods of teacher development at the university, including workshops. But after my experience with research, I think this was the really way of not developing as a teacher rather than training. So this is my second year of teacher research, together with Kenan Diklitash. Yeah.
So in your case, yeah, I know your context. Yeah. In that context, there is an actual a scheme is set up to encourage teachers if they want to engage in research, and it runs quite successfully. Yes, thank you for that one. Yes, please, Alan.
Hello. Well, I think what's really interesting about having this conference here in Malta is the diversity of backgrounds that we all have, and research is traditionally associated with universities, and increasingly within mainstream education, primary and secondary, research is carried out by teachers. Research in private language schools, which are represented, I think there are a lot of people here, or several people here, from private language schools, is, as far as I know, almost non-existent in Malta, and I would say the same in the United Kingdom as well. And what would be interesting for me personally is to see whether research can be encouraged and supported within the private language school sphere as well. It isn't at the moment, generally speaking.
Does anyone want to disagree with Alan or agree with him? Can we pass it?
Hi, I'm Sarah from European School of English. I agree with Alan. Most teachers, I think, find it not a waste of time, however, that they don't have the time to research. We kind of found a way around it by asking teachers to use authentic material, and they have to research and create lessons using current affairs and adapting those articles or videos and researching ways of incorporating skills using current affair issues. That way they are kind of forced to research. And most teachers end up loving it. So I think that's a good way to start.
Yeah, there's this idea of, if they're not interested in it, should we be forcing them to do it in the belief that once they have a taste of it, they'll want to. Alan's comment is interesting about the people who are here today. Does anyone here work at a university? I know Kenan and the colleague from Turkey, but in terms of the local contingent, do we have any university-based people? Okay, all right. Any full-time university people? Yeah. Which is, I think, interesting. And I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's interesting. I'd say it's a good thing that you're here. I'm not saying it's a good thing the academics aren't here.
I would just disagree that research in private language schools is non-existent.
Okay.
Because most private language schools have marketing departments, and they are largely research.
Okay, all right. So one of the issues we'll explore quite early in the workshop is what we mean by research, because I think very often that's an initial stumbling block for a lot of people. They have ideas about what research is and isn't that can get in the way. So we've already heard two examples here of what research might be. There's the
in fact, every single student is given a questionnaire.
Yeah.
That is all part of research.
Yes. So it is a type of research. There's market research, whereas perhaps we're more interested in educational research, so we can distinguish between the two. The other example we've heard is getting teachers to research how they can use authentic materials, which again we'll come back to once we've explored how we, I think, should be defining research. And this is really, really fundamental issue. If you're working with your schools or you're trying to promote a research culture in your organizations, a very, very important starting point is clarifying what research means. Because if there's ambiguity about that from the outset, things don't work. because everyone's working at cross purposes. Okay? And we'll definitely come back to that because that's an important issue. So in the room we have people who are teacher trainers. I don't want to label anyone, but just in terms of broad categories. We've got teacher trainers, we've got language teachers, we've got managers. Does anyone respond to that title, sort of? Director of studies, so people who do mostly managerial or partly managerial or administrative role. Teacher trainers, teachers, directors and assistant directors. Any other categories? Is everyone happy being one of those three? A teacher trainer, a teacher, or a manager? And many of you will be more than one, of course. Yeah, many of you will be all three. Okay, all right.
One size fits all.
One size fits all. Okay, all right. But no academics. Okay, no academics. That's good. All right. So that's a key thing to come out. Oh, yes, please.
The classroom is a laboratory.
Where's the microphone, please?
Mic is here.
Yeah. So it's too big to throw. Might injure someone. Sorry.
That's right. Like I said, the classroom is a laboratory for me.
Yes.
It's the ideal place to look into the. I'm researching the link between miscommunication in written and spoken English, particularly in aviation, and obviously. The authentic material
Thank you for doing that.
is
Yeah,
the student, actually.
Okay, all right. So the idea of where research takes place, for example, an obvious answer is it's in the context where we work. That's obvious to us, but not obvious to everyone. And again, it comes back to clarifying what research means to us. Of course, there are many different flavors of research as well. I mean, flavors is not a particularly academic word, but you know what I mean. So a teacher doing research in order to develop an understanding of their own work is slightly different to an academic doing research to get published and get promoted. I think the way we talk about research today will cover all of those, okay? Simply because we've got a broad audience. Okay, so those are some useful starting points there, but I think the key one for us is just thinking about what does research mean to us, because unless we clarify that, then things become slightly difficult. So I'll have a look at your questions as we go along. The second task there is to do with the good researcher, and I find it useful before we start thinking about good quality research to almost a step before that is, what do we think the characteristics of a good researcher are? And you've got a short extract here on your handout. Oh, I think it's short anyway. Maybe it's not short for this time in the morning. And this is taken from a book some of you may know by Zoltan Dornier, Research Methods in Applied Linguistics. And he gives his views on what a good researcher is. And if you don't want to read the whole thing, the key part is the first paragraph. The first part is the key part is the first paragraph. So can I just give you just a few minutes to, you've all got fantastic skimming skills, I'm sure, but I've told you where the important information is. What characteristics does he highlight in terms of the good researcher? Do you agree with his analysis? You don't have to. And are there any additional characteristics you think that good researchers need? And some of these may come from your own experience, of course, of doing research. So what characteristics does he highlight? Do you agree with his analysis? And is there anything you want to add to that list? So I'll give you a few minutes to do that, please. Okay, so let's see what Dornier gives us four things, doesn't he? He says, while experience and academic expertise do undoubtedly help, and of course, once he starts like that, there's a but coming somewhere. He says there are other things, and he says genuine curiosity, a lot of common sense, good ideas, and something that can be best described, and he's really stretching it to say that's one thing, to be honest, but discipline, reliability, social responsibility. So really there are about 6 or 7 there, not 4. Okay, how do you feel about that in terms of you doing good quality research? If this is what a good researcher is, That's, in a sense, what you're aspiring to. Okay.
Maybe this can be included in the first category, but imagination is really important.
Imagination.
Yeah.
Not in imagination in the sense that you make things up, I assume.
No.
No.
Of course. I mean, to add to the depth of the study, like you need to imagine where this study can go. I mean, like finding out different layers behind your idea. So
the imagination of identifying a topic, imaginative in the sense of thinking of creative ways to investigate it, imaginative in the sense of being able to interpret the results in... Yes, okay. But not in the sense of making things up, yes.
It's pretty much the same thing that makes a good teacher, is what makes a good researcher. I mean, you've got to have the ideas, you've got to have the intuition, the imagination, and the inspiration.
Yes, I think there are many parallels. Daniel?
I'm not so sure what he means by good ideas, how he defines good ideas.
Yes.
But to that list, I would also add the ability to be self-critical as a researcher and to be able to question your own assumptions. If you're unable to do that, then you're going to be making huge mistakes in your own research.
Yes.
Something else which researchers sometimes suffer from, unfortunately, is the inability to communicate their own research. And sometimes, due to the requirements of the discipline, writing skills are essential. And not just having a good proficiency in your writing, but also being able to communicate your research in an accessible manner.
Okay, so 3 things there. One is what do we mean by good ideas, and a little bit later today, one of the things we'll focus on is what makes a good topic for research, because that really is an essential element in being successful, finding a good, quote, topic. But what does that mean? Tonya doesn't really tell us really a lot about what good ideas are, but we do need them. Being self-critical, I would add to the list. It's important to be able to, for example, identify problems in our research before someone else does it for us. Someone else will always do it, but if we've got the ability to question what we're doing, to be self-critical in terms of the procedures we're adopting, etc., that can be very useful as well. And the third one is to do with writing, yes. And again, towards the end of the day, we'll spend a little bit of time on the area of communication. Because,
to make your writing readable?
well, whether you're communicating your research in written form or oral form, ultimately that's how the research is judged. If you think about it, research is only judged when it's communicated. And it's communicated orally or in writing. If it's not communicated well, that impacts on the way it's evaluated. So if you've been to a conference and the speaker has not done a good job, whatever that means, of communicating, the research may have been designed very well, it may have been executed very well, but then it's fallen down at the stage of communication. And unfortunately, that undermines everything. So communication is also a very, very important part of what it means to do good quality research. Communication is something we should be thinking about from the beginning as well. Typically it's, okay, we've finished the research, now let's think about communicating it. But ideally that should be part of the overall strategy. So towards the end of the day, we'll spend a little bit of time on that as well, because it is important. Any others you want to add? I think we've added some useful ones. Keenan, you've got another one?
Yeah, I think there's also patience. I mean, researchers should have some
patience.
Be patient too.
Yeah.
I was going to say resilience, because it can be tiring.
Yes,
Not giving up.
Patience, resilience, determination, persistence, however you put it. Flexibility is typically sensitivity to those we work with.
Because the requirements vary so much in the classroom, the students' requirements. So
Yes.
you need to be sensitive to the needs, to the individual needs.
Okay, so 2 things here. One is the flex. Well, 3 things maybe. There's the persistence. If you're not persistent, it's difficult to make progress as a researcher, because things rarely go to plan. Rarely go to plan. I'm doing a study at the moment, which I'm not pulling my hair out, but I'm having to be quite persistent, because I'm working with some teachers who are in Russia, and I'm not in Russia, so we're all arranging interviews on Skype. And so I email these teachers, well in advance, and I say, they've agreed to participate in the study. I email them and say, it's time for our next interview. And the kinds of replies I get are just, well, I can't say what I really think, but, it's trying. It's, I say to them, how about Monday at 7:45? And they say, yeah, let's try. And I say, what does let's try mean? What does let? Or else they haven't confirmed that we're going to speak, and then like 2 minutes before, I get a notification on Skype saying I'm ready for a call, and I'm not prepared yet, because I need to prepare for the interview. So I'm finding this quite trying at the moment. So the whole idea of being persistent and patient rings very true for me at the moment. The other one is sensitivity, because typically we're working with other people. I mean, we may be working with text sometimes, in which case we don't need to be that sensitive because texts don't have feelings. But normally we're working with people, and there's a whole ethical dimension of research, which means we have to respect those we work with. We have to take their feelings into account. We have to make sure no one is embarrassed or hurt or harmed or discredited or inconvenienced or disadvantaged as a result of the work we do with them. So very often people come to me with proposals and they say, what do you think about this? I'm going to teach this class in this way using method A, and I think that's really good, it's really going to help them learn, and I'm going to have another class where I'm going to deprive them of that completely. And I say to them, well, ethically that's a bit questionable because you're depriving them of something you think is good. And of course, if we look over the history of, research in psychology, there are many examples of things that we're not allowed to do today, like giving people electrical shocks and seeing how they respond. So I think sensitivity is a link to ethics, about a concern for the people we work with. Researchers, unfortunately, and I include myself here, we tend to be a bit selfish in the sense that we're very, very focused on what we need. We need certain data from certain people in a certain format by a certain date to fulfill our purposes. And very often we lose sight of the people we're working with. And with these people in Russia, I am very conscious that they're very busy. They seem to work quite long days, these teachers. And the fact that they've agreed to participate is something I'm grateful for. But still, it's finding that balance. I do get a bit frustrated when the Skype notification pops up or someone says, let's try. In fact, the let's try taught me to be prepared, because the same teacher did the same thing again to me this week. She said, let's try. And I said, well, this time I'm going to be prepared just in case she does pop up online. And she did. She did pop up online at the time. And then I was ready for the interview. So I learnt my lesson there. Let's try seems to be a confirmation that we will speak at the agreed time. Okay, so lots of characteristics that researchers need, not just the ones that Dornier's mentioned. I think there are many others we could add. And as one of you said, many of these are useful for us as teachers. You may already have these characteristics in abundance as teachers, and that's an example of something you can transfer from your work as a teacher to your work as a researcher. Dornier mentions things like discipline. I think that's important. He talks about not taking shortcuts, which I think is always a temptation in research, taking shortcuts. Hopefully we get there sooner, but of course quality tends to suffer as a result. He talks about social responsibility. And how does he define that? That's towards the end. Accountability to the field more broadly, and more broadly to the world. That's quite scary in a way, saying we're accountable to the world. The idea is that research should contribute knowledge in some modest way. And it should be knowledge that others can benefit from. I think that's what he means by the world. So that's the social responsibility side of it. So some of the issues we highlighted earlier in our own discussion related to defining research. I think this is a really, really key issue. And the next task focuses our minds on that. And in task 3, you can see it says, decisions about what counts as good quality research are inevitably, and often tacitly, linked to views about what research is. In other words, how you define good quality research is influenced by how you define research. Okay? And I've done a lot of work with teachers around the world in investigating what research means to them. Okay? I've been working with teachers, and my task has been to understand what comes to teachers' minds when they hear the word research. And I'll tell you a little bit about that after this task. So here's a task for you. There are 10 statements there. I think there are 10. And it's a quick agree, disagree task for you, which you can do in your little groups, okay? So very quickly read each statement, decide whether you agree, disagree, don't know, don't care, and have a quick discussion with someone next to you about why you feel that way. For example, the first one is research with 1,000 participants, 1,000 students or 1,000 teachers or 1,000 people is better than research with 50, for example. Agree, disagree, why not? As quickly as you can through the list. Would you like to identify any particular statements which were the cause of particular disagreements? Were there any you found yourselves talking about more than others? We don't have to go through them one by one. We can pick. You said you were arguing a lot here. Yes, photos and pictures are valid forms of data in research.
I think teachers can
Let's do I first, yeah? Let's do this. I was photos and pictures are valid forms of data in research. And the question was, do you agree or disagree with that? I mean, when you look at papers or you hear about research or you think about research, do you think about photos and drawings, or do you typically think about tables and charts?
But you need to consider that the people reading your research. No, I mean, you need to consider that just like students, you have visual students. People reading your research might be visual as well, and need images to understand it better.
Yeah. So when I said pictures there, I wasn't thinking of Excel charts or that sort of thing. I didn't mean a chart is not data. A chart in Excel is how we present our results. Okay? But what we're thinking about here is actually the raw data, the information we collect is in visual form. Okay? Now, this isn't something that is particularly prevalent in ELT research.
It can be if you're looking at the body language, intercultural classroom context.
Yes.
Then if you've got, emblematic symbols, etc., it would be very.
It could just be photos of classrooms. Yes.
And you can also take photos, perhaps, of the linguistic landscape, perhaps to complement your study. You might have another instrument and use.
What does a photo of a linguistic landscape look like?
For example, street signs.
Okay, thank you for that example. Yes, so going around taking photos of language in use around. Yes, if you're doing that kind of thing. Or photos of, if you're working with children, photos of what's happening in your classrooms. So photos, video. So these are called visual methods. These are called visual methods, and I mention them simply because they're an emerging. Well, there has been an emerging trend in maybe social science research more generally for a number of years. There is a whole domain of research, and there are books written about visual research methods. But in education,
if you're assessing hearing impaired, then visual methods are really approved.
They can be helpful for that reason, yes. In education, they're becoming more popular. Education more generally, the use of visual methods. In English language teaching generally, still quite rare. It's not really a strategy that people are using a lot. I've done a couple of recent projects where we've been playing around with pictures. Here's one example. This is a study I was doing with some colleagues in Barcelona. And we were working with trainee teachers, people who they were still at university, and they were being prepared to be EFL teachers in primary schools in Spain. And we were exploring their notions, their ideas of good EFL teaching. So we wanted to understand what good primary EFL teaching means for these trainees, and we wanted to track that over the course of a year. And so, for example, at the beginning of the project, we ask the trainees to draw a picture that represents their understandings of a good primary EFL lesson. And here's an example of what they produced. And if we look at that, of course, we can extract some ideas about what good EFL teaching means to the person who produced the picture. We notice the layout of the classroom straight away. We notice the layout, so there's something going on there. We notice the position of the teacher. We notice the student with their hand up, so something to do with maybe being orderly and all of that. The students look quite relaxed. The students look like they're having fun, etc., etc. They seem happy. Now, one thing we have to be aware of when we're using pictures is, of course, how do I know what that picture means? So I can describe what I see as a researcher. I can say they're sitting in a horseshoe, and they're sitting on the floor, and the teacher is sitting on the floor. And I can say all of that. That's descriptive. But where you have to be careful then is when you start interpreting. What does it mean? So if I say that means that the teacher believes that in a good EFL lesson, pupils are relaxed, for example. That's an interpretation. So there's an important distinction to be made between describing what's in the picture. That's not open to argument. It's factual. And then the interpretation. So as part of the study, we didn't just rely on the pictures. We asked the authors, or the artists, or the trainees, to also write a short paragraph for us where they explained the picture. They told us what the picture means. And that made it less likely that we would misinterpret what they were trying to tell us. So I've been experimenting with visual methods for a couple of years now, and I do find them useful. Because very often through a picture, you can elicit things that people can't put into words. Pictures have a way of accessing or allowing us to access things that can't be put into words sometimes. This is just a drawing. Visual methods can include photos as well. I've seen studies where students have been given cameras. We don't have to give them cameras these days. They've all got cameras. And they're asked to take photos of their encounters with English outside the classroom for a week. And they come back with these photos, and these photos become the basis of a project, of a study into how students experience language, English outside the classroom. So one thing I'm mentioning is I'd just like to broaden your views about what counts as data. I mean, we all know about questionnaires and all of these things, that's fine, but there are other options beyond that. And as researchers, our responsibility is to be aware of the full range of strategies available to us for collecting data. Because if we're not aware of the full range, we can't make an informed choice. We end up going back time and time again to questionnaires, for example. Now, I use questionnaires. There's nothing wrong with them, but they're not the only option, and they're not always the best option. So the argument is, the more strategies we are aware of as researchers, the wider the pool we have to choose from. We can make more informed choices there, okay? So do add visual methods to the list of strategies you are aware of as researchers. Ken, was there a question? Videos, yes. Videos, photos, drawings, anything that's not text, basically, that is visual in some way, falls under this category.
In actual fact, do you think the way things are going these days with mobile phones and all the rest, I mean, how many of us, instead of writing a sentence, just use a picture or something?
Yeah. People don't make notes about slides anymore, do they? When I'm giving a talk, they take photos of slides. Yeah. It's just more convenient. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that we're in a sort of a visual age, in a sense, that everything's being captured in some way digitally. And I think researchers are starting to take advantage of that. I say in English language teaching there isn't much. There's the work I've done. I've got a colleague of mine working in Finland who's doing some similar work, but we haven't seen many examples of this in our field yet, okay? So photos and pictures are definitely valid forms of research. Some people might say, well, how can a photo be a valid form, of research? It is a valid form of data, definitely. There's no argument about that one. Any others you want to ask about? Daniel.
Statement that researchers need to be objective. I consider them to be quite provocative because it seems to be a very common misconception.
Researchers need to be objective. How many sort of people generally agreed with that?
Is it a need or a want?
Well, the statement says need. So I'm saying it's a requirement. General agreement with that? I can see more people starting to agree with it. So then the question is, what do we mean by objective? That's the question, isn't it? What do we mean by objective? What does that mean to you? The opposite of subjective. Okay, that's a good start. That's a good start. Does that imply that subjectivity is a bad thing in research? Yes.
Not having a bias.
Okay, not being biased. What does that mean? Alan.
It comes back to the definition of objectivity. I can't really see how it is possible to be objective in anything human if a researcher has their own background, their own education. It's impossible to divorce yourself entirely from the person that you are and the belief systems that you have, no matter how hard you try.
So your definition of objective then is the absence of the personal dimension. Yeah. Yes. Kenneth.
So as long as you support your subjective stance,
Can you hear Kenneth from the back there? Not very well. Okay, so let's use the microphone because it's important for everyone to hear. Yeah.
What I say is, as long as you support your personal stance of subjective ideas, you can claim your ideas were relevant in any stage of research.
So you can be subjective as long as you can justify it.
Yeah.
In an objective way.
Yeah. And again,
Yes.
I think objectivity, obviously, as much as possible, you have to try to.
Yeah. You can either speak up or you can use the microphone. I don't really need a microphone, to be honest.
I do.
Sorry, I'll take that back. Forget that. The cameraman needs the microphone. Sorry.
I think you should attempt to be objective. I mean, it's very difficult to be completely objective. But at the same time, I think you need to be able to question yourself, to be self-critical, and that's maybe what makes you a bit less subjective, perhaps,
all right. Okay.
Especially in the interpretation of the data.
So clearly, biased research, blatantly biased research is not good quality research, If you've designed a study in a way that inevitably leads to the conclusion you were hoping for, then of course that's not good. So I can design a questionnaire which says, please give your opinion of my workshop today. Brilliant, fantastic, or great. Now if I give you those three options, obviously, I'm biasing the results. I mean, that's just a silly example. But we do see this sometimes in questionnaires. The options we give people do not allow the full range of responses. And inevitably then we say, 95% were satisfied. Well, there weren't really any options for them to be not satisfied. So that's a simple example of something that happens, that biases the results. So clearly, blatant bias needs to be avoided, and we do that by designing our instruments carefully and all of that. But I think, as some of you are saying, it's impossible to completely separate the human element from the research process. As long as there are human beings involved, there will always be a human element. There will always be an element of subjectivity. Who's making decisions about what to research, how to research it, how to analyze the data, how to interpret the data? All of those decisions are being made by humans. So there's always an element of subjectivity. What matters is that subjectivity is controlled, is monitored. Some of you have used the word self-critical. Yeah. And the term I like to use is disciplined subjectivity. That's a term I like to use. Disciplined, it's not a cop-out, okay? It's disciplined subjectivity, which really allows us to acknowledge there's always an element of subjectivity, but also says it has to be disciplined. It has to be monitored. We have to be aware of that. And I see countless proposals where people are going into a study, they've already made their minds up about what it is they're going to find. And that's not good, of course. That doesn't lead to good quality research. Or they say, there's a problem here and I want to fix it. But they haven't really collected any data to show there is a problem. They've just decided. That's problematic. So monitoring how we feel, for example, about an issue before we start studying it is important. Just putting all of that on the table. And that's why some kind of reflective tool for researchers, some kind of journal or something that allows us to become aware of our own biases and assumptions is useful. But we can never completely eliminate the personal side. So that's why I like this word, disciplined subjectivity. So I wouldn't say researchers need to be objective, but researchers need to be sort of disciplined about their subjectivity.
If you're assessing something like racism in a classroom, would you use a biased questionnaire or something like that? Just to elicit their response?
So the purpose of the research would be to investigate whether students or whoever have particular attitudes to certain groups.
Yes, like immigrants integrating.
Yeah, so I don't think you would use the biased questionnaire, because when we say biased questionnaire, it means the questions are designed in such a way that lead to particular answers, and that's never good. If we're asking people questions, we should always make sure they are able to give the full range of answers that are possible. We shouldn't just ask them questions which allow them to agree or disagree or to give a very limited range. And that's what makes designing questionnaires complicated sometimes, because we have to try and anticipate what the full range. That's why yes-no questions are very often not particularly useful. You get questionnaires that says yes, no, where clearly sometimes might be a justifiable answer. It's a simple example, but we see it again and again. Okay? So we don't want to use biased instruments of any kind. Okay. So disciplined subjectivity. This idea of scientific objectivity is a myth, really, okay? Is a myth.
Okay. I think this might tie in with E. The purpose of research is to prove something. Because if you're biased, you might end up forcing the data to fit in something you want to prove. Mm-hmm. So it could be that you are not setting out with a task of proving something, but you might actually use research to discover something.
Yes, yes, yes.
If you use, for example, something like grounded theory, you would discover through research and then ground it in the data that emerges, mm-hmm. and then work your way to prove maybe, or I don't know, I might have an issue with the word prove.
Yes, prove is a problematic word. And when we think about what prove means, it's got this sense of finality to it. It's got a sense of finality to it. We've proved this, and therefore it's no longer open to question or to debate. So I don't like the word prove, and when I'm working with people, I discourage them from using the word prove. My study has proved that. No study proves anything really, okay? Particularly in educational research. Okay? Our study allows us to reach certain conclusions which are always subject to revision by subsequent research. Okay, there's never a once and for all finding. Okay, so the idea of, again, proving, I think, is problematic. Research allows us to explore, to investigate, to understand, to reach maybe temporary conclusions, but prove is just a bit too final. Yes.
I would like to pick on B. Questionnaires are a more scientific way to collect data than interviews.
Yes.
Because I think that at times people prefer quantitative methods over
mm-hmm.
qualitative ones,
yes.
thinking that they lead to better conclusions because you can count data, mm-hmm. and counting is always good.
Yeah.
And I really think that mixed method designs are better. Or not better, but there's an alternative to it.
Okay, alternative, yes. Again, I would avoid saying X is better than Y, and we'll come to this. I don't have to say sorry, that's why we're here. Researchers very often do talk about this being better, and as we'll say a bit later today, we can't make decisions about which research strategy is better without considering why we're doing the research, about the purpose. Okay? So if you say to me, which is better, a questionnaire or interview, I'll say, well, what are you trying to do? That will be my answer. What are you trying to do? What is your purpose? So strategy must be linked to purpose. A questionnaire is the right tool for certain jobs. It's not the right tool for other jobs. So it's about having the right tool for the right job, really. So I think the point you're trying to make is that there are alternatives to quantitative approaches to research. Yeah? There are alternatives. And again, you'll be okay with this, but in many parts of the world, there's still a very, very strong focus on quantitative research. That's what research is seen to be. And if you're trying to get funding, for example, and you put in a qualitative proposal, you've got absolutely no chance of getting funding, because it's still seen to be, soft and unscientific, which is unfortunate, because qualitative research can be as valuable as quantitative research. It's all about the purpose, okay? It's all about the purpose. So questionnaires are more scientific? Not really. I mean, we can talk about what scientific means.
Are we sort of seeing it in terms of a longitudinal study? We're assessing something over 10 years?
It's a question of purpose, okay? I think it all comes back to purpose. Not just, the time frame is an issue, but the purpose. What is the purpose of the research? If I'm trying to understand an individual in some detail, then a questionnaire is not particularly useful. I need to work with them qualitatively. If I'm trying to understand processes, a questionnaire is not particularly useful. I need qualitative. If I'm interested, of course, in larger groups and trends across groups and patterns, and I'm trying to look at connections between variables, then a questionnaire can be more useful. So it's about the purpose. I'm not going to say questionnaires are better or worse. I've used both qualitative and quantitative and combinations of them in different projects. But it's all to do about the purpose of the study. So very often I meet people and they say, okay, well, tell me about your proposal. And the first thing they say is, I'm going to use a questionnaire. But that's not the first thing you should talk about. I say, well, hold on, I'm going to rewind a bit and tell me about what the purpose of the study is, and then we can work out what the appropriate strategy is. You don't start off by saying, well, I'm going to use a questionnaire, or I want to use a questionnaire. Okay? Now, as I said, I've done a number of projects with teachers around the world where we investigate their attitudes towards research. And there's quite a common trend to emerge from this work is that teachers' ideas about research very often are linked to what we might call conventional notions. And if you look at the top of page 4 there, you can see those four characteristics. For example, if I give teachers a list of characteristics of research and I ask them to choose the ones which they think are most important, or I give them little descriptions of different research scenarios and I say, which ones do you think are research, which ones are not, these tend to emerge quite consistently. And this is based on data collected from many different contexts around the world. So teachers, or ELT professionals, because I've worked with managers as well, tend to think of research as something that is large scale. The bigger is better. The first statement we had there, 1,000 is better than 50. I hope you all disagreed with that, okay? Quality is not simply a product of size. If you have a badly designed questionnaire and 10,000 people fill it in for you, it doesn't make your study any better. Okay, you've just got 10,000 bad questionnaires filled in. So, but this is a persistent view that people have about research, that bigger is better. It is not the case. Okay, it is not the case. It's not simply about size. For certain types of research, of course, bigger is better, but not for all types of research. So we can't use it as a way of defining research. The idea of objectivity, which we've discussed, comes up again and again. This belief that objectivity is important. And again, we need to moderate that view slightly. We're not saying objectivity isn't important, but achieving this total objectivity isn't really feasible. Third one, that research is statistical. This comes up a lot as well. The idea that when people think about research, they think about numbers, and they think about questionnaires. And so, a lot of teachers say to me when we talk about research, well, I can't do research because I don't like statistics. I'm bad at maths. This is what people say to me. So this notion is getting in the way before we even start, because you can do research without numbers. I've seen papers criticized because there weren't any numbers in the results. You know, the reviewer had been looking for the tables or the charts and never found them and was surprised. So those are narrow views. And the last one is this idea of good research is something that's generalizable. You know, you've done your research in this context, but your results should apply to contexts elsewhere. And again, that's a misconception. Okay? Very often, research, the purpose of research is to understand a specific context in detail without really worrying about whether it applies elsewhere. Okay? So, based on my experience, dealing with these kinds of misconceptions is one of the biggest hurdles in terms of engaging teachers more, getting ELT professionals more interested in research. One of the biggest obstacles are these misconceptions that they very often have. So if you're planning to go back to your institutions and to encourage teachers to get involved in research, it's important that you spend a bit of time with them to help dispel some of these concerns, because they do get in the way. If teachers think, or if professionals think that research has to be large-scale, statistical, generalizable, objective, then of course it's not something they see as feasible, and therefore they're not interested. But there are other ways of presenting research, okay? So we need a definition of research, really, which doesn't refer to specific methods or methodologies, which is quite generic. And here's a set of criteria which I find useful to work with. So the definition of research I work with is that it is a process that is planned. I mean, you don't fall out of bed and say, I'm going to do some research. I mean, there needs to be some planning. And planning is an important dimension. We'll talk about quality at the planning stage as we go along. It's systematic, of course. There is a logical process. Now, systematic doesn't mean it's fixed in a rigid way. Okay? Systematic means that the decisions we are making along the way are carefully thought through and logical. It doesn't mean rigid, though, because sometimes we do need to be flexible, like me and my Russian teachers. Research is purposeful. There must always be a purpose. And people, again, they talk to me about their research sometimes, and I say to them, but why are you doing this? And they don't really know, or they haven't thought about it. If you don't know why you're doing research, there's a problem. Okay? There needs to be a purpose to a research project. It's empirical in the sense that we need to collect data. So when I ask teachers or ELT professionals, I very often ask them, do you do research? And they say yes. And of course, then I say, can you give me examples of what you do? A lot of the things they write down are not research. Okay? They write down, for example, I search for activities online to use in the classroom. Of course, it's research in a very generic sense. I'm looking for things in the way that maybe I do research before I book my hotel to get the best price. But that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about that kind of research. Okay? So looking online for materials is not research in the way we're defining it. Okay? So research is empirical in the sense that we go out and collect some data. And of course, then it's analytic because we have to do something with the data. It's not just about collecting. We actually have to analyze. And finally, and importantly, it's made public. And we talked earlier about communication. If the inquiry we do is a wholly private activity, it's not research. Okay? It may be all of those, but if we keep it to ourselves, it's not research, because research needs to be shared in some way. If we keep it to ourselves, no one can build on it, no one can learn from it, no one can critique it, no one can replicate it. It's of no value to anyone else if we keep it to ourselves. So if you want to do inquiry, which is private, we can call it something else. You can call it, I don't know, reflective practice, if you want to, or something like that. But don't call it research, because this is, again, this creates problems. Academics are very often dismissive of teacher research, unfortunately. But sometimes they're right, because what teachers are saying, what teachers are calling research isn't really research. It's some kind of reflective activity. And reflection is great. There's no problem with reflection. It's just we don't need to confuse matters by calling it research, all right? All right. So this is a definition of research I work with. This is a definition of research I work with, okay? It's a generic definition. As you see, it doesn't say anything about quantitative or qualitative. It doesn't say anything about particular instruments. It doesn't say anything about how big or small the study is. How?
Would you add honesty to that?
Would I add honesty?
Or transparency?
Yes, yes. Ethical. Let's say ethical. We could stick ethical in there. Yes, maybe those criteria don't do enough to emphasize ethical. But yeah, honesty is part of being ethical, and we could certainly add that to the list, because if research is not honest or ethical, then it's not good quality. It's not good quality. Okay. I guess how I might justify the fact that ethics isn't there is because this is a definition of research rather than good quality research. But when we come to good quality research, ethics definitely has to be here. But the point I want to emphasize, this is a generic list of criteria. It's inclusive, and it helps us get away from these notions that limit us by thinking about, whether it's a questionnaire or an interview or big or small or numbers or not numbers. This includes everything, okay? And I find this a useful way of characterizing research. It helps us get away from those misconceptions. So again, if you're going back to your organizations or for your own work and you're trying to introduce people to research and encourage them to do research, I think it's useful to help them think about research in these terms, in an inclusive way, rather than some of the more limiting ways that we've talked about. Okay, now before we stop for our break, let me just very quickly introduce the rest of the workshop, where we're going to look at dimensions. Yes, I do have a slide here about making public, which is something I wanted to emphasize. And I've already made this point, that if we don't make something public, if it remains wholly private, then it's of no value to anyone else, and we shouldn't call it research. So there's just a quote there that says, it needs to be made public because to be distinguished from simply improving one's own private understanding. It is not another name for personal study. So yeah, we can call it personal study or personal reflection. And I'm not saying that's not valuable, just to be clear about this. It is valuable for our own professional development, but there's no need to call it research because no one else is learning from it. Okay, so the three dimensions we're going to look at in the rest of the workshop is quality at the planning stage. And we said, research, part of our definition of research is that it's something that's planned. So what can we do at the planning stage to enhance quality? And it's important to think about that, because if we take shortcuts at the planning stage, they typically come back to haunt us later on, okay, and to interfere with quality. There's quality in the actual conduct of the research. That is collecting the data and analyzing the data. So what can we do at that stage to enhance quality? And the final stage, which we've mentioned, the communication or reporting or dissemination, whatever you want to call it. What can we do at that stage to maximize quality? And good quality research will address all three of those. If we think carefully about all three of those and we take appropriate measures, we're more likely to end up with a good quality product, okay? So after the break, we'll start looking at issues to do with planning, and then we'll work our way through, okay?